Good afternoon, you're watching Broadcasting Scotland. Thank you for joining me today. It's the full Scottish. Today it's Sunday the 10th of July, and today we have for you a special Remember Srebrenica programme. We have two guests. First of all, I'll very quickly introduce Julie Adair, who's from Remember Srebrenica Scotland. Good afternoon, Julie.
Hi, Hugh.
And I'll ask you in a few minutes to explain what the purpose of Remember Srebrenica Scotland is, and also Srebrenica is a caster and journalist from Ferrer. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you. Good afternoon.
Okay, yeah, of course. We have a slight delay, of course, on the communications. So today we have a special programme. I'm in my Glasgow home studio. Brian is in our headquarters in the centre of Glasgow. And Julie Adair, you're also quite near Glasgow. And Ika, of course, is in Bosnia. So we're doing a special today. So very quickly, just in 30 seconds, please, Julie, before we get into the big topics, could you very briefly say what is Remember Srebrenica all about, please?
Remembering Srebrenica Scotland is a charity which exists to share what happened in Bosnia and in Srebrenica during the war years in the 90s, to help people understand the lessons from that time and to ensure that through education to the general population and to schools and young people where we can, that this sort of thing never happens again.
Yeah, thank you. We will explore in great detail in the next hour or so what happened exactly. Now, very quickly, Ika, could you first of all explain what's taking place in near Srebrenica, where you are just now? What sort of memorial events have been planned for this weekend?
I am in Potočari, close to Srebrenica, just 10 minutes away from Srebrenica. And today is everything being set up and prepared for the commemoration, 27th commemoration of genocide in Srebrenica. This year we have 50 remains of victims of genocide in Srebrenica being buried right here behind me, as you can see it. And there are still 1,200 remains and victims that are still missing, and more than 500 families still looking and searching for their loved ones. So we are here to set up for tomorrow, and tomorrow will be the 11th July, will be the day that the world remembers as the worst atrocity on the European soil after World War II.
Thank you, Ika. So what's happening today is that families are still trying to identify murder victims, many hundreds of which have not been identified yet. I think you said 500 families still don't know what happened to their relatives.
Yes,
okay,
more than 500 families.
Right.
Yes, looking still for the remains of their loved ones. And let me just tell you this: the youngest victim this year is the 16th, Salim Mustafic. That is. His remains were found in 2001, but his family just couldn't bring it to the strength to actually identify. When you identify your relative, your loved one, your son, then you know that he's really gone. So until this year, he wasn't identified, and the family really brought the strength to really identify him, and he will be buried. His remains will be buried here tomorrow.
Yes, I see. And what age was he when he was murdered?
He was 16.
16, I see. Thank you. So our sad task now, first of all, is to look at the latest in the Ukraine war. So if you two would wait for a few minutes, I'm going to read over the latest stories we have from Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, which today brings us today 137. First of all, Serhii Brachuk, who's a spokesperson for the Odessa Regional Military Administration of Ukraine, said that Russian forces were purposefully destroying crops in the Kherson region. He said fires occurred in the fields every day from shelling, and added, Russian troops do not allow locals to put out fires, destroying granaries and equipment. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has fired his ambassadors to Germany, India, the Czech Republic, Norway, and Hungary without giving further details as to why. Zelensky has urged his diplomats to drum up international support and high-end weapons to slow Russia's advance. It's not immediately clear whether those envoys are going to receive new jobs. President Zelensky said on Saturday night yesterday that the Russian army had attacked the cities of Mykolaiv, Kharkiv, Kirivri, and the communities in the Zaporizhia region, covering a broad swathe of the country. Russia is moving forces across the country and assembling them near Ukraine for future operations, according to the British Ministry of Defence. The latest intelligence update says a large proportion of the new infantry units were probably deploying MTLB armoured vehicles taken out of long-term storage. The governor of the Luhansk region said Russian forces were creating hell, as he put it, in shelling the eastern region of Donetsk. Serhiy Haidai said that Russian forces fired 8 artillery shells, 3 mortar shells, and launched 9 rocket shells overnight. At least 5 people were killed on yesterday, and 7 others injured by renewed Russian shelling in Donetsk, according to Ukrainian officials. A missile attack in Druskivka in the northern Donetsk tore apart a supermarket. American Secretary of State Antony Blinken said his country's commitment to the people of Ukraine is resolute, while announcing more than $360 million of additional aid. The United Nations said Ukraine's armed forces bore a large and perhaps equal share of responsibility for the assault on a home in Luhansk, where dozens of elderly and disabled patients are without water or electricity. At least 22 of the 71 patients survived, but the exact number killed remains unknown. A few days before the attack, Ukrainian soldiers took up positions inside the nursing home, making the building a target, according to the UN. Kira Rudik, who's a Ukrainian member of parliament with the centrist Golos party, said rockets struck central Kharkiv, injuring and hospitalizing 4 civilians, including a child. The first cohort of Ukrainian soldiers arrived in the UK to be trained in combat by British forces. The programme will train up to 10,000 Ukrainians over the coming months to give volunteer recruits with little or no military experience the skills to be effective in frontline combat. And so that's the latest day 137 of Russia's illegal attack on Ukraine. So we will, of course, discuss and explore the similarities between Russia's behaviour in Ukraine and the Republika Srpska behaviour in Bosnia 27 years ago. But let me just update our viewers on what we are doing today. Srebrenica Memorial Day is in fact tomorrow, the 11th of July, and so we have a special programme today coming from Glasgow and from near Srebrenica. 27 years, forces led by Republika Srpska General Ratko Mladic attacked the UN compound, which was supposed to be a safe area, which was defended lightly armed UN troops. They were in fact Dutch troops, unable to stop the advance of the Republika Srpska army. So on that day, 27 years ago, men and boys were rounded up. Several thousand were taken away, not to be seen again, and that marked the start of the sort of atrocities which Ika was talking about earlier on. Subsequently, of course, Ratko Mladic was handed over to the international trial at The Hague and is now serving life imprisonment for his part in what has officially been described as genocide and mass murder. So that's what we're remembering today. As Ika said, in Europe, actual genocide, a period 27 years ago which gave rise to a new phrase in the English language, the phrase of ethnic cleansing. It was a policy of Republika Srpska and General Mladic to clear Muslims out of that area and produce a Serbian majority. Okay, so first of all, my question, let me go over to Julie Adair. First of all, Julie is representing the Scottish branch of Remember Srebrenica. Now, can you see any parallels, Julie, between what happened in the massacres and between Russia's intentions on Ukraine?
As Ika will no doubt say, the situation in post Yugoslavia after Tito's death was very complicated. This was not one country invading another and trying to take over and get rid of certain populations. This was complicated and nuanced between the Serbs, the Muslims and the Bosniaks, as they were called, and the Croats. But the issue really in around Srebrenica was, as you said, it was a UN declared safe area. So a small silver mining town was overwhelmed with tens of thousands of refugees who came from the surrounding area in the Drina Valley to seek refuge. So for a number of years before the events that started on the 6th of July 1995 and culminated, as you say, Hugh, with the separation of men and boys to be taken away and systematically murdered, there was bombing and shelling in an area which had a huge number of refugees who were just trying to eke out survival away from the areas which the Serbs had systematically moved into. So I think the difference here is what we have. We don't have any so-called safe areas in Ukraine. And then we had, as you just mentioned, the town was taken over by Ratko Mladic and the Republika Srpska troops. And he said on the 6th of July, we are now taking this back for the Serb people and taking it away from the Muslims. And he used the more pejorative term for Muslims. So the difference for me is that this was an area where a single population was systematically targeted and, as you say, ethnically cleansed.
And Ika, at the time, there was much agonizing and wringing of hands in Europe. I remember that. I remember seeing on Channel 4 News pictures of men and boys being rounded up. And as we know, as Julie said, they were never seen again. We were able to report on that, but we were completely impotent to do anything about it. How do people feel about the international ones where we alarmed, they're equipped, were completely out, or did we just not give it enough importance?
That is actually a very good question, Hugh, and question that has to be explored, but I have to take you back just one step back. And this is when we said that Dutch battalion, which was part of United Nations, was not able to defend the people of Srebrenica and the refugees from other villages that came to Srebrenica seeking refuge, seeking safe zone, safe haven. Actually, they were ordered not to intervene whatsoever. I have had multiple conversations and interviews with different former UN generals where they said we were ordered not to intervene. So the destiny of the people of Srebrenica was already written by Ratko Mladic. And as Ms. Julie already said, Ratko Mladic, that is an infamous sentence when he said, we came here to liberate Srebrenica from the Turks. So he's talking about the history that is 500 to 600 years old, and saying that they are going to ethnically cleanse the entire region. During a couple of days around the 11th of July, more than 8,000 men and boys were systematically murdered. And when we talk about international community and what is the sentiment in general of people when it comes to international community, there is also a sentiment that is very known that comes from Bosnia, and that is, Europe, you're not hearing us, you're not seeing us. But that was, of course, a different time than what's going on in Ukraine now. When we look at Ukraine, whatever happens in Ukraine today, you will know about it today, because today we live in a world of social media, and we live in a world where information gets to you very quickly. And when it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina in the 1992 to 1995, that was a completely different situation. We needed to actually have the reporters, the journalists on the ground to report of what's going on in the world. So when it comes to genocide in Srebrenica, it was premeditated act that came from Belgrade and then came from Banja Luka, Pale, and Ratko Mladic was the one that was willing to execute that. And international community did not act on it, did not react, but after genocide in Srebrenica, the world really picked up very quickly on what was going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina and other towns as well. And the world said, okay, maybe it's time we stop this. And then the Dayton Agreement in 1995 was signed just to stop the war, but it has paralyzed the country entirely and completely. Today and tomorrow, the families of the fallen members of their members, their sons, their fathers, their grandfathers, are actually being threatened year in and year out, and being bullied because they want to commemorate their loved ones. They want to find their loved ones. They are still somewhere in mass graves across Bosnia, mass graves that are still not uncovered. And that kind of situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bosnians do blame a lot of international community for that situation today, because what is going on today, we see that Bosnia is paralyzed in the European Parliament as well. There is no unanimous decision to sanction certain politicians that deny genocide, that glorify war criminals, even though they are convicted by two courts, and that is ICTY and ICJ, International Court of Justice as well. So it is a paralyzed country, but the worst thing today and tomorrow is that the families here will be bullied into fear of just commemorating their loved ones.
And Julie, do you see that this is something that we should remember in remembering Srebrenica? Do you think it's important to point the finger, to point the spotlight at those who would deny that that genocide actually took place, who deny that actually we saw a Holocaust again in Europe? Is that a big theme?
Definitely. Funny enough, I was exactly where Ika was a month ago today, and I was in the nearby town of Bratunac, which just so that you understand, Srebrenica is in Republika Srpska. So although the area where the memorial center is and the cemetery is kind of slightly ring fenced and away from that, and to a certain extent protected, all around are towns where genocide is being denied. And I know that on Ika's channel N1 CNN in Bosnia, they ran a story yesterday about how the length of the 4 kilometers from Potocari, where Ika is right now, to Bratunac, the locals put up pictures of Serbs who they claim also died in the war. Now, it's war. People died on all sides, and that is terrible. But the fact is there are young people in Bratunac who will never get to see what happened at Potocari, or will never come to the memorial center, the way that our schools go to museums on school trips. I saw when I was in Bratunac a month ago, it was prom night. So all these 15 and 16-year-olds were out, and they were beautifully dressed, and the girls had flowers, and they were on the arms of their boyfriends. And I asked the lady I was with, I said, so have they been to the center here and see what happened? She said, no, because if they were to come, or their school was to ask to come to visit this memorial center, they would have to have approval from the Ministry of Education in Sarajevo. And the Ministry of Education will have a Serb delegate who will say no. So this thing of certain parts of the population in Bosnia just not conceding that this genocide happened, and the allegations that of the now 6,800 plots and headstones in that cemetery where Ika is standing, there are claims that some of those are empty, that some of them are other bodies from other places, that actually there aren't that many people killed. It just goes on and on. And when you remember as well, Hugh, and Ika will know this, that before the war, these were communities that lived side by side. They did not, there was no, if you were a Muslim, you came to a Christmas Eve cemetery, you came to a Christmas Eve service, or you celebrated Christmas with your Orthodox neighbor. If you were an Orthodox Serb, you maybe come to the Eid celebrations or the Eid commemorations at the end of Ramadan. These were people who lived closely together. They were at family weddings and christenings together. And then literally overnight, some of the people that were in those houses turned on their neighbors. And that is the thing, that when you start off as friends, and unless this things from language and racist language is nipped in the bud, it can escalate the way it escalated in Srebrenica and across Bosnia. So for us, the lesson is saying this can happen at the drop of a hat. It's happened in Srebrenica, in my lifetime, in your lifetime, Hugh. It could be happening in Ukraine as we speak, and it's happening in many, many other places. So for us, it's about saying never forget, because this can happen again.
Now, Ika, I was looking at the words of Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, who's quoted on the Remember Srebrenica Scotland website, and she said, it's our responsibility to ensure diversity is celebrated and protected. So it strikes me that if I was parachuted into Bosnia 30 years ago or 40 years ago, I would have said, this is a diverse place. This is a place that's made up of communists, of Muslims, of Serbians. And this thing that always intrigues me and mystifies me about the genocide is, if you look at the history of Ratko Mladic, his parents were partisans who fought the Nazis. He himself was a young communist. I just can't understand how a person with that background can become a mass murderer. Can you explain?
Absolutely, Hugh. Also another very good question, and I just want to say that Miss Julie has, I'm very, very thankful for Remembering Srebrenica Scotland organization, charity, that does so much. So you, Miss Julie, and Mr. David Hamilton as well, promoting the truth of what's going on here. When it comes to diversity, Hugh, it's incredible. Just last night, Linda Graham and I walked the streets of Sarajevo, and in Sarajevo, you have 4 major religions right next to each other. People marry each other, people love each other. So you see the diversity happening in Bosnia. Again, it's thriving. And then you come to Srebrenica, or you come to other smaller places where genocide had occurred, where ethnic cleansing had occurred. For example, Prijedor, Žepa, Srebrenica, Potočari, Bratunac now as well. Then you see that division, and especially around this date. And this date, many find being actually divisive for the Bosnians. As Ms. Julie said in Bratunac when she was there, and that happened actually yesterday. So they hang the photos of alleged war victims of Serbian population, or let's say they were soldiers. So they hang the pictures of the soldiers, fallen soldiers who actually committed genocide in Srebrenica. And the reason they did this, they said, we want the international visitors, when they come to Srebrenica, we want them to see the faces of the Serbian people that are falling during war in Bosnia. But when you think about it, the soldiers, Bosnian Serb soldiers that committed genocide and have fallen, what does that really tell us? For me, and I had this conversation with Linda last night, maybe those pictures should have stayed, because then international community representatives can see who the perpetrators were, if you look at it that way. So the police had ordered for those pictures to be removed, but then they put them back on the private property, so police cannot act on private property, of course. So when we were driving just an hour or two before we came here through Bratunac, we've seen those faces, and it brings up a lot of emotions, especially because I'm Bosnian. I have friends that are Serb, that are Muslim, that are Bosniak, that are Croat. I don't see the difference between people because of their religion. You know, you can only see difference between people who's human and who's being inhumane. And that division you can see here in Potočari, in Srebrenica. What is going on right now, what we have to do in order to say, when we say never again, and this is something that we continue talking about, we say never again. We've said it in Rwanda, we said it in Bosnia, we said it in Cambodia, and now it's happening in Ukraine. And Ms. Julie said it can happen again, but it is already happening. Canada, for example, already declared that what is going on in Ukraine is already genocide. Lithuania did the same. So making sure that we classify what's going on in Ukraine timely will help the world timely react and help Ukraine defend from the perpetrators, from the illegal invaders, which is Russia and Putin's army. That did not happen in Bosnia. It took 4 years of the longest siege in modern history, his siege of Sarajevo, more than 11,000 citizens being murdered by sniper and shelling constantly every day. More than actually 1,601 child being murdered by sniper in Sarajevo. 8,372 men and boys were murdered here in Srebrenica, Bratunac, and Potočari. And what does it really tell us? When we said never again, when we said never again in ICJ and ICTY, and when European Parliament said never again, and when United Nations said never again, that never again really was only until the next time. So it kind of lost a lot of its meaning for Bosnians. What Bosnians really want to do here is just live in peace, stop the rhetoric, the war rhetoric that we are hearing every day from the politicians, because the same faces we are seeing today are those faces that we have seen during war. So faces have not changed. They are the same politicians, they are the same ideologies, and the ideology that brought Srebrenica genocide to happen are the ideologies that thrive even today in 21st century, and especially from Bosnian Serb politicians such as Milorad Dodik.
Now, I wanted to ask you about the European Union involvement, because Ika has said that everyone in the West was slow to get involved and slow to realise what was happening. Serbia, of course, handed over Ratko Mladic, and they were hoping that that would accelerate Serbia's accession to the European Union. I know, Julie, we're not in the European Union at the moment, anyway, so we don't have a say. But do you think is there a sense that Serbia has maybe been forgotten? Serbia was complaining actually a couple of weeks ago that while Moldova and Ukraine are now going to be fast-tracked into the European Union, although that fast-track might be 10 years, by the way, but Serbia is saying, what about us? We've been waiting for accession and we've already handed over Mladic. So has the European Union, do you think, been sidelining the Balkan story?
I
think that's one for Ika.
Okay. Sorry, I shouldn't really ask you about European Union policies as such. We're not in it anyway. But do you think the European Union should be paying more attention to the Balkan area?
Absolutely. Not just the European Union, but also the world. When in United Nations General Assembly, when it was the resolution of Srebrenica genocide, Russia vetoed that resolution. And it just stopped there. And when it comes to Europe, European Union, this is very important. And then I'll bring up Scotland as well, and Nicola Sturgeon, which has done so much. And Scotland has done really a lot when it comes to commemorating the victims of genocide. So what's happening in European Union? You have European Parliament, you have MEPs that support Bosnia, that come to Bosnia once in a while. We sit and we talk, we do our interviews, and they promise the Bosnian people, Bosnian and Herzegovinian. And when I say Bosnian people, that I mean Croats, Bosniaks, Serbs, and the others as well. So we have a lot of minorities here as well. They promised to make sure that the next session in European Parliament, Bosnian question matter will be brought up, and they will do everything they can in their power in order to sanction those who are undermining peace and security in this country. And this is important when I say security. Since National Assembly of Republic of Srpska last year in December, they brought a clause that said, okay, we are now starting the secession. These are the separatists, Bosnian Serb separatists. We are going to start a secession from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now imagine, I have these conversations and these debates with Scots a lot, because they keep asking me, but what's wrong with being independent? And I said, well, imagine now the Gaelic part of Scotland wants the independence from the rest of the Scotland. So this is not the same question. Bosnia and Herzegovina has had a referendum for independence in 1992. This is when the war started, and Bosnia is an internationally recognized country with internationally recognized borders. Now, having separatists such as Milorad Dodik try to do the secession from the rest of Bosnia and Herzegovina is just another step and the last stage of ethnic cleansing and genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Because when you think about it, Republic of Srpska, Srebrenica is here. So what is going to happen with the memorial with 8,372 gravestones that are still set to be the people that still set to be buried here? What is going to happen to the families that live here, the Bosniak families that live here, Muslim families that live here? And like Ms. Julie said, she was in Bratunac and she spoke to young people. They've never been here. They don't know the truth. So the history books are telling three different stories, three different histories. And what Scotland has done, it really amazes me. This is something that I really, really love you guys for, is that when Marie Todd was the Minister of Education, she made sure that she was here in Srebrenica, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. David Hamilton was here. They worked hard together in order to put genocide in Bosnia, Srebrenica genocide, in the books. So Scotland does more for keeping the truth alive, commemorating the victims, making sure that the real truth, that because there's only one truth, you know, there are no sides of the truth, there's only one truth, is being told to the Scots. And through Scotland, the world is learning what's going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina as well, because they pick up very fast. I don't know if Scots know that, but what you guys are doing, what Scottish government is doing when it comes, when he says, we are having a problem in Bosnia, we have to make sure we pay attention to it. You know, we hear it, the world hears it. So you have good people that will come forward, like you, Miss Julie, like David Hamilton, like Ian Blackford, like Nicola Sturgeon. And trust me, I'm politically completely impartial. I have nothing to do with politics, but those are the people, and you are the people that can really tell the truth to the rest of the world, and you have been doing that already. So when it comes to MEPs, they have been falling back a little bit, but then Scotland kind of picked up and made sure that it's being said what has to be said.
And I think the other thing, Hugh. Oh, sorry,
go ahead,
Hugh.
go ahead, Julie, please.
There's a bit of delay, sorry. I think the other thing that we need to realise in the UK and in Scotland is, and I don't remember, those of us who were watching the war in the 90s might remember a Guardian journalist called Ed Williami. And he was one of the journalists who, with an ITN, a television news colleague, discovered the concentration camps. And I think we can all remember that awful picture of an emaciated man standing behind barbed wire. He is an expert on Bosnia. And there's a book that I've been rereading to commemorate. I don't know if you can see that, but this book is about what happened in Bosnia and the world after the war. And there's a key thing there. Bosnia, the reckoning. Unlike South Africa, unlike Northern Ireland, unlike other countries, there has been no truth and reconciliation work in Bosnia. So when Ika refers there to the three parts of government and the civil service in Bosnia, there has been no impetus to recognize what's happening. And this key word, reckoning, to understand, to recognize, and critically to move forward, simply hasn't happened in Bosnia. And the things that we are looking at now, and the threats that the people that Ika is referring to, the people who are coming to visit the graves of their loved ones or to inter tomorrow 50 more people. And I just wanted to say as well, these are not, to be brutal about it, what is in those cemeteries, and you see behind Ika some of the green headstones, those are where there are coffins yet to be interred. These people, these are sometimes a couple of bones. Because when the Serbs realized that the genocide had been recognized and identified and spotted by NATO, they went in with heavy lifting machinery and moved the bodies from one place and interred them in a second place, and sometimes in a third place. So just to be really brutal about it, moving corpses with heavy lifting machinery, they are going to be broken up. So there are people where they have the thumb of their son in one place, they have a knee bone in another place, and they have something else somewhere else. And it is absolutely horrendous to think about that there are people who are burying or have a headstone for their son or their father or their uncle or their grandfather, and it is basically 2 or 3 pieces of that body. And that is what has never been acknowledged. And that is why the special place where Ika is standing and the memorial centre over the road from it are absolutely essential for us to share the stories about what happened there and to share the pictures. We in the West are very familiar with the images of the gravestones and the cemeteries in northern France from the First and Second World War. The first time I went to the cemetery where Ika is standing, that's exactly what it made me think about, because where Ika is standing, you just see these white headstones going on and on and on and on. 6,000 300 and I think, I don't know what the numbers are, Ika quoted them earlier, but that is the volume of death and suffering that happened in this area. And that's why we have to have a reckoning, and that's why we should never forget.
Well, Ika said, which I didn't say, people in Europe are paying attention to Scotland. Of course, the flavour of the Scottish movement towards independence is all about what's sometimes called civic nationalism. And what that means, well, remember, I quoted Nicola Sturgeon earlier on as saying that Scotland wants to celebrate and protect diversity. So I would think you could say that the Scottish independence movement is doing its utmost to not be separatist. That's a word that's sometimes used. So I wonder what Julie thinks about the idea of identifying too closely with your group, because that's obviously what eventually happened in Republika Srpska. People eventually, at the end of that move away from communism, ended up by super identifying with being Serbs, and that makes everybody else an outgroup. Julie, do you think that all nationalisms have that danger of identifying too closely to your own group and then making everybody else? Do you think it's going to avoid that?
I think it probably comes from the politicians. What happened in Bosnia was a rhetoric which was being pushed by certain politicians. And as I say, one day people are living together in peace, regardless of their ethnic background or their religion. And literally the next day or in the next few weeks, that all changes. And what that comes from is rhetoric. And I have to say, I think the other thing, Anika mentioned it earlier on about the difference between Ukraine and Bosnia, is we have now social media. Now, my background is in the media. My background is in the internet. I have seen how the internet has fueled, and we all have, has fueled the kind of rhetoric and the kind of one-sided or partisan viewpoint on Twitter and in other fora. So I think this comes, I don't think it's about necessarily identifying, but it comes from where you have a certain group of politicians or a certain rhetoric and discussion, if I can call it that, on social media channels, that all of a sudden your identity becomes bigger than perhaps it was when all this debate started. And that's what we're seeing on social media around Bosnia. That's what we're seeing as well in terms of the Ukraine debate. And I think it comes down to whether or not you can take a balanced view of what you are hearing and be able to make decisions for yourself about where you fit in that larger story.
Ika, is nationalism and is it always likely to end up in a nasty place?
Hugh, would you please maybe repeat that? There are some.
My question. Yes. The communications are good. Yeah, my question is on your view of nationalism, because you praise Scotland and its attempts to be a modern democratic nation, but at the same time, Scotland wants to break away. Well, half of Scotland wants to break away from Europe. Is there also that nationalism might end up with being supranationalism and separatism?
I can only talk about what's going on in Bosnia. I'm not really competent to talk about too much about Scottish independence movement and what is going on politically on that field. Also, I'm restrained as well to make any political statements. Of course, you will understand that. But when I can tell you what happened in Bosnia, what is going on in Bosnia, why nationalism thrived in the 90s and in the late 80s when Tito died, like Ms. Julie said, the break of Yugoslavia made sure that nationalism really thrives. And there were people that were under Tito, Josip Broz Tito, that really were nationalists, but they couldn't express those sentiments because Tito in communism, he did not let that happen. So when he was gone, we started seeing people like Slobodan Milošević, who died while being prosecuted in ICTY. Then we saw as well Ratko Mladić thriving through nationalism. And then we see all those people that also on the Croatian side, we saw Franjo Tuđman, who is basically a hero in Croatia, but did not, had also his, let's say, had his fair share of war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm from central Bosnia. My family was expelled by the Croats in central Bosnia, so it was not the Serbs, it was Croats for me. And then eventually the nationalism that took off in Bosnia in 92 to 95 came down after the war a little bit. But then again, the nationalists like Milorad Dodik again, he's the member of presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, saw that as the opportunity to stay in power, and how to stay in power is to put the same ideology in the minds of those young people like Miss Julie saw in Bratunac, in the minds of people that are still here, that experience the war, and especially radicalize the young people. The young people in smaller towns across Bosnia and Herzegovina are very radicalized when it comes to their identity. There is nothing wrong to have an identity. There is nothing wrong with that, but to be radicalized about that and hate anybody else who is of other background or ethnicity, that is pretty wrong, and that is thriving in Bosnia and Herzegovina again.
So a theme you have repeated there is the idea that there's no reason why a group individually should become racist, and there's no reason why outgroups should be identified, but it's a responsibility of the politicians. You've talked about rhetoric, and I think, Julie, you said it earlier on, it's about the kind of language used by the people in charge. So there's a responsibility by the political group. I guess what I'm talking about is, how do you respond to somebody who you don't like? Do you respond to somebody who's different to you? How do you respond to a political opponent? As I remember the First Minister said earlier on, I quoted her saying it's about diversity. So in a mature society, we have to be able to get on. We're all different, but we have to be able to get on with each other. You mentioned earlier on, Julie, your history is in the internet. Is there some sense now which is increasing the kind of hostility, increasing the idea that people form wee groups and regard everybody else as the enemy?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, and I think the way that, particularly on Twitter and other things, you are fed the kind of rhetoric, and you hear from people who believe in what you believe in. So your Twitter feed my Twitter feed is full of a certain kind of thing. My Remembering Srebrenica feed is full of all kinds of things that are happening in Bosnia right now. So you'll be fed the kind of messages that you want to hear. And I think that's one of the things that is so important and isn't happening in Bosnian schools, about how children and young people understand that there are usually many sides to a story. And the whole fake news thing, if you want to go down a rabbit hole and just read about the things that interest you and that you believe in, with the internet now, you can do that, and you will never hear any other views. And I think it's beholden on teachers, and I know they do this, to try and help young people understand how to see all sides of a story. And there was, it happens in Srebrenica that the genocide isn't even taught in Srebrenica. There was a piece I was reading the other day about, and I think it was from the Ed Vuliami book again. He went back to Srebrenica in 2005, so 10 years after the genocide. And there was a Serbian head teacher of the Srebrenica High School, who said, "We will not teach this. We will not teach this." That is 3 kilometers from where Ika is standing right now. So I think it is about making sure that the messages are there. And that's what we try to do, is to try and get into schools, create learning materials, to work with people as the people that Ika mentioned, like Marie Todd and our First Minister, and actually politicians from all stripe, I should say. We do delegations with people who are very senior in public life across Scotland, and we take them to Srebrenica, which means that the allies that we have now in the Scottish Parliament, from the First Minister, who I know will be tweeting about the genocide tomorrow, through her press office. We have people in public life who absolutely support what we do and are happy to take part in our events and are happy to share the messages that we are trying to share about what really happened in Gotić and Srebrenica and Ferrer and Bratunac and all the rest of it.
Well, let's look at education for a minute. Ika, I know you've said already it's very difficult to get biased education on that period, as Julie just said. I don't know if we've got the link with Ika at the minute. I'll just come back to Ika. So let me return, Julie, to the question of education. Well, first of all, let me just ask you to remind viewers of the Ed Vuliami title you were talking about.
Yeah, let me just open up again.
I remember reading him. So it's so you just move out to one side. The camera's not exactly the other side. The camera's funny. So it's the long war is dead. Long live the war.
The war is dead. Long live the war. Bosnia: The Reckoning by Ed Vuliami, and there are a lot of really good books on Bosnia. There's the absolutely harrowing End Game by David Roda, which basically takes you through from about the 6th of July all the way through to up to Dayton, which is almost a day by day, hour by hour retelling of what happened in Bosnia. But this in Srebrenica, but this one particularly is very interesting because it does take that look about what happens when many years later nothing has been resolved. And I would thoroughly recommend it.
Well, okay. I think maybe we could put some links, some those titles on our Twitter feed or on the website later on if people want to do any further reading. I need to get up to date.
I'll send them on to Linda.
Thank you. The only book I read is going with Misha Lenny, who used to report in the Balkans for the BBC, wrote an excellent book, but that's a while ago.
Yes, that's a really good one. And talking about Sarajevo, one of the ones that I particularly enjoy, it's not the right word, is a book called Besieged, written by an American journalist whose name escapes me, but I'll let you have it, which literally looks at one street in Sarajevo and the people who lived on that street during the siege and what their life was like. And as a sort of microcosm of the larger siege and the hell that those people lived through in the longest siege in modern history. That one street and the lives of half a dozen families in half a dozen households in that one street in the old town of Srebrenica. Because Sarajevo, because Sarajevo and Srebrenica, remember, are in bowls. So they are both the people who were in Srebrenica as refugees or who were in Sarajevo as inhabitants were sitting ducks. And the Serbs in the hills that you can see behind Ica and the hills around Sarajevo, they took up position where the Winter Olympics had so gloriously and had happened in 1984. Those positions, the bobsleigh ride, the area where the bobsleigh pitch or bobsleigh run is where the Serbs took up position. And as Ica mentioned earlier on, they just simply took pot shots at the locals, or they shelled them, or they mortared them. So the landscape, the beautiful landscape of Bosnia contributes as well to some of the tragedy that we've been hearing about.
Kate, at the moment, I don't know if we've got the link to Ica in Potocari. That one seems to have frozen. We'll try and get Ica back, Julie. So we were talking about reading, and we will assemble a wee reading list and we'll see if we can get that out later on. I was going to ask you anyway to expand on the educational side. Well, first of all, could you just go over when was your organisation actually set up? Remembering
we were founded in 2016. We were founded in 2016 by the Very Reverend Lorna Hood, who was a former moderator of the Church of Scotland. And we have a trustee board of about 7. We have people, as Ica mentioned, David Hamilton from the Police Federation Scotland, who was part of Edinburgh Direct Aid. You might remember, Hugh, that a series of lorries left Edinburgh and took valuable supplies to Sarajevo. And David's mother-in-law, Christine Westcott, was killed as she was driving into Sarajevo. And so we are a board of 7, including Bosnian Scots, including people who have worked and have lived experience of Bosnia. And our aim is education, as you say, but through a number of routes. So we have resources to take into schools. We do events. Obviously, they've fallen away a little bit in recent years because of COVID. But also, we take delegations to Bosnia of politicians, of groups across Scotland, of people in public life, and that's how I first went on my first trip to Bosnia, to Sarajevo, and to Srebrenica in 2018 with a women's delegation. And we focus specifically, and I'm sure Ica will mention this at some point, on the brave so-called mothers of Srebrenica, women who lost their husbands, their sons in 1995, and who very bravely were witnesses at the trials that happened in The Hague, in Mladic and Karadzic and Milosevic. They are the ones who have been absolutely fearless in standing up to tell their stories and the stories of the men that they lost in the genocide. And the mothers are extraordinarily supportive of the work that we do in Scotland, but also our sister charities in the UK and in Northern Ireland and in Wales. And they are the ones who have driven so much of the storytelling, and any reckoning that there has been from these brave women telling their stories. Women who came back to Srebrenica, having been evacuated to Tuzla or wherever else in the Drina area, and rebuilt their lives in spite of the fact that in many cases they were seeing people who they knew had been part of the genocide, or in some cases had been the people that raped them or raped their daughters. And they still see them in the market, they still see them in the post office, they still see them on the street. So they stood up and told their stories and brought some kind of resolution at The Hague to the kind of events that happened in Bosnia.
Yes, reconciliation must be so difficult, but at the same time, as we've often seen, for example, in South Africa, it's essential to try and move on, but not by forgetting. Now, can you just quickly, what is the, how can people get in touch with Remember Srebrenica Scotland? What's your website?
We are at srebrenica.scot, and we're in the middle of redesigning our website, so that's about to go live in the next few days. And we haven't had, as I say, we haven't had events nor delegations because of the pandemic, but we are busily getting our website up and running, and we're going to start running more events. And what I should also do is a little plug for the event that we have to commemorate the events of the 27th anniversary. And on the 22nd of this month, if you are in the Central Belt in Scotland, we are doing a showing of the film, the award-winning film by a Bosnian director called Quo Vadis Aida, which talks about the events running up to the 11th, the events of the refugees trying to get sanctuary at the Dutch base in Potocari. And then we're going to be doing a live link up with Almasa Sahilovic, who is the communications lead at the Memorial Centre. So tickets are free. If you go to our website, or you go to srebrenica.scot/Quo Vadis, you can get tickets, and we will be showing the film for free at the CCA in Glasgow, and then running a live video link up with Almasa. And Almasa was 8 years old, and when the Serbs separated her sisters, her mother, and one brother, who all got on one bus because the younger one wasn't of the age to be taken away by the Serbs. But her older brother, Mohammed, was killed, and she now works at the Memorial Centre over the road from where her brother's headstone is, behind Ika, as you can see there. So we'll be talking to Almasa about the events of the 11th of July 1995 in our live video link up to Srebrenica on the 22nd of July. That's my little plug.
Okay, thanks, Julie. No, I will come back to that in a minute. I just wanted to interrupt to say I'm afraid the link has gone down. Ika Ferrer Gotić, journalist from Sarajevo, was speaking to us from Potocari, and she's photographed there at the gravesite where more memorials are taking place this weekend. At the moment, the link is down. Let me see. I don't think at the moment we're going to be able to get hold of Ika. We'll see if we can get back to Ika before the programme finishes. Okay, back to you, Julie.
I was just going to say, for those of you who are on Twitter, talking of social media, do follow Ika, because one particular thing which she posted this morning is an amazingly beautiful song. And we talked about diversity, sung by a girls' choir with an amazing soloist talking about the genocide and talking about children particularly looking for their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, their sisters. And you look at the girls' choir, and you have all ethnic diversity there. So you have a very mixed, quite unusual, I should say, in Bosnia to have a youth group like that, which has young ladies in full scarves, but you also have blonde ladies, and you have darker, you have all spectrum of girls singing this most beautiful song. So do follow Ika on Twitter, and you'll see this lovely, lovely song, which kind of sums up to a certain extent why we're here talking about this today, and why what is happening in Potocari today and tomorrow is so important for us to learn about and to understand.
Yes, that's Ika Ferrer Gotić, who's a friend of Broadcasting Scotland, actually. She was in Glasgow last November to report on the United Nations Climate Change Convention, so we met her there. And yes, it's definitely worthwhile following what Ika's had to say. Let me just go back to your plug earlier on. A few months ago about the film Quo Vadis Aida, which had won some awards in European film festivals. I forget the name of the director. I'm sure you'll remember who she is.
Jasmila. I can't remember her last name, but it's Jasmila. And interestingly, the book is based on, it's obviously based on real events, but it is based on the experiences of one translator, Hasan Nahanovic. And the director decided that she wanted that character to be a woman. But it is based on this translator who, like the director of the Memorial Center, Emir, who is, as I say, literally over the road from the cemetery where Ika is standing, they were both translators with the Dutch forces, or the Dutch protector forces, during the war, and both are very, I guess you could say the word damaged, of course, by what happened. And I'll give you as well the note of the book that Hassan wrote about his experiences, and on whose experiences the film Quo Vadis Aida is based.
So that film, Quo Vadis Aida, which has won awards, and I've seen clips of it, and I was hoping to get an opportunity to see it. So just remind me again, it's on the CCA
We'll
in
meet you there
Glasgow, that's in
properly.
Sauchiehall Street.
It's on
And I
Sauchiehall
hope so,
Street. It's
yeah.
the CCA Glasgow. It's the 22nd of July. There'll be light refreshments about 6:30, and then 7 o'clock we will start the screening, and then we'll do a video link up with Almasa in the Potachari Memorial Centre immediately afterwards. Just a short Q&A, about 20 minutes, just to have somebody who was actually there give us the context of her experiences during that week and during the years running up to it, because she also lived in Srebrenica through shelling, through terrible privations of, no running water, no food, and very little to live on. So we'll speak to Almasa immediately after the screening. So I do hope we'll see you there, Hugh.
Right.
And
Well,
the link to get a ticket, and again the ticket is free, is srebrenica.scot/Quo Vadis.
yes, I will do that. Yeah, I'll put that in the diary. The diary's right here. I'll
Great.
put that in as soon as. Excuse me, I'm not being rude by looking at the phone here. I'm just getting a message from Brian in the studio. He reminds me, yeah, Jasmila Zbanic is the director
There we
of
go.
Quo Vadis Aida. So I'm afraid we're not able to get the link re-established with Ika, who's in Potachari just now, but I'm glad we were able to speak to Ika earlier on. So let me just go back to where we started. At the top of the programme, of course, we were doing the roundup from Ukraine. Do you see any similarities between the kind of language used by Putin and language used by Serbian nationalists? I'm thinking particularly of several speeches over the years, it turns out, when Putin has said that Ukraine doesn't really exist. There's not really a country called Ukraine. They think they're Ukrainians, but they're not. That sounds like an innocent statement of fact, which is not fact, it's an opinion. But there's an inherent dating, things like that. You people don't exist.
So, sorry, Hugh, a phone was ringing in my office.
Was that your phone?
Would you mind just repeating the question?
Yeah, Ukraine doesn't exist. That's Putin's opinion. I'm just repeating this because I think it was Sky have a special on Putin's history, of which I was looking at last night, and apparently he said that a long time ago. It's always been his theme, Ukraine. There isn't a place called Ukraine. They think they're Ukrainians, but they're actually Russians. So that seemed like an innocent, wrong remark, but it's actually a very dangerous remark.
It is, and I think the whole issue around what happened in July in Bosnia, and particularly in Srebrenica, was the Serbs wanted to create a wider Republika Srpska, and that northeast corner of Bosnia was going to give them that corridor to do that, which is why the whole Drinavari area, which is the beautiful, that we seem to have a picture back, but that whole verdant area behind where Ika was standing was so important to the Serbs. And this whole thing about this is ours now, and we're taking this and we're giving it back to the Serb people. There was nothing to give back. I mean, this was the land grab that delivered what happened in Srebrenica, which is exactly the land grab that we're seeing by Putin as he tries to take over and take back, if you like, large chunks of the Ukraine.
Okay, so we'll just hang on a minute, Julie. We're just seeing, as you saw, there was some live footage there, but I don't know if we're able to get contact back with Ika. So just if you joined us now, we've been broadcasting this afternoon, partly from Glasgow here, and also partly from Potachari, which is near Srebrenica, where commemoration events are taking place today. What's happening in that graveyard that we were looking at earlier on is that remains of murdered relatives who have actually now been identified are being ceremonially interred, and more events like that are happening today and tomorrow. So those pictures are live from that cemetery in Potocari, which is just a few kilometres, as Julie told me, just a few kilometres out of Srebrenica. 27 years ago, the massacres by Serb nationalists took place. So the actual Srebrenica Memorial Day is tomorrow, and as Julie said, I think the First Minister will be making further statements on that tomorrow. So well, I'm afraid we'll have to just bring this to now. So I'm sorry we aren't able to get to say cheerio to Ika Ferrer Gotić in Bosnia, but we thank her and the team out in Bosnia for joining us today. And also, it's been a pleasure to speak to you, Julie. I'm glad we had the chance to meet digitally. And we'll see. We'll see if we can get a ticket if there isn't a big rush into CCA. I'll try and get my ticket for the Quo Vadis Aida film. That's the 22nd of July. Okay, so thank you to the team, and thank you especially for our team who are out in Bosnia right now, so giving us live pictures from Potocari. Well, Julie, that's great. So I'll let you go into your Sunday afternoon now, and I'll just wind up the show. So thank you for joining us. I hope to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
And to you watching us today, thanks for joining Broadcasting Scotland. That was the full Scottish on Sunday the 10th of July. Now, if you haven't come across our broadcasts before, we do this every Sunday at lunchtime. We also do a Monday to Friday evening news programme, Scotland at 7. These are all supported by our subscribers, our supporters, who are the people who have looked at the website on the screen below. And if you want to sign up and help Broadcasting Scotland, starting at a direct debit of £5 a month, you can become one of our supporters. You're our only source of income at the moment, so thank you for being there and thank you for helping us. If you want to take part and become a volunteer, like myself and the team in the studio and the team right now in Bosnia, then please get in touch. It doesn't matter where you are, of course. As you can see, Broadcasting Scotland can bring you the news and discussion and reportage from anywhere we have an internet connection, we can do the show. So that's it from me just now. We'll be back with Scotland at 7 on Monday night. So thanks for watching and good afternoon. Bye.